3 months passed, and the world changed in ways that nobody had predicted. The footage from the riot spread across every network, human and Vicorian alike. People watched it over and over again. They saw a feared war commander take blow after blow to protect a small human child. They saw her hold Lily close while her own blood soaked into the dust. They saw something that did not match the stories they had told themselves about the enemy. Questions were asked. Debates erupted. Old certainties began to crumble. And slowly, painfully, the conversation shifted from revenge to reconciliation. Sylveth was released from detention after 6 weeks. The charges against her were dropped, not because anyone forgot what she had done during the war, but because what she did during the riot mattered too. She became an unexpected symbol, a living example of the possibility that enemies could become something else. The peace conference was held in New Denver, in a grand hall that had survived the war with only minor damage. Delegates from both species gathered to discuss the future, to negotiate treaties and borders and the slow process of healing. And they invited Sylveth to speak. She almost refused. What right did she have to stand before these people and talk about peace? She had ordered attacks that killed thousands. She had given commands that destroyed entire colonies. The blood on her claws would never wash away, no matter how many times she tried. But then Lily came to visit her. The little girl was escorted by her father and 2 peacekeepers, who looked nervous about the whole situation. But Lily did not look nervous at all. She ran to Sylveth as soon as she saw her and threw her arms around the Vicorian's waist, squeezing as hard as she could. "I missed you," Lily said, her voice muffled against Sylveth's scales. "I was worried about you." Sylveth knelt down so they were at eye level. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Lily's face with one careful claw. "I missed you too," she said. "More than I knew was possible." Lily grinned. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Sylveth with the seriousness of a diplomat presenting a treaty. "I made this for you," she said. "For your speech. So you remember." Sylveth unfolded the paper. It was a drawing done in bright crayon colors. It showed 2 figures sitting on a rocky outcrop, sharing bread. One was small and human. One was tall and covered in scales. And above them, in shaky child's handwriting, were the words, "Friends share food." Something in Sylveth's chest broke and mended at the same time. She held the drawing like it was the most precious thing in the universe, because in that moment, it was why. She asked softly, "Why did you approach me that first day? Why did you share your food with me when everyone else wanted me dead?" Lily thought about this. Her small face was serious and thoughtful. "Because you looked hungry and sad," she said. "And my mom always said that nobody should eat alone." Sylveth was quiet for a moment. Then she asked a question she had been afraid to ask for a long time. "Your mother. The war took her from you. Is that right?" Lily nodded. Her eyes were sad, but not angry. Nathan stepped forward, putting a hand on his daughter's shoulder. His face was tense, watching Sylveth carefully. "She died in an attack on our colony," he said quietly. A Vicorian attack. Sylveth felt the ground shift beneath her. She looked at Lily, at this child who had shown her more kindness than she deserved, and she understood something that changed her forever. "You knew," she said. "Or you could have known. And still you came to me. Still you shared your bread with me. Why?" Lily shrugged, a simple gesture that carried more weight than any speech. "Being angry forever sounds really tiring," she said. "And you were not the one who hurt my mom. You were just sad and alone." Like me, Sylveth had no words. For the first time in her long life, she was completely and utterly speechless. She pulled Lily into an embrace, holding her gently, feeling the warmth of this small human who had somehow reached across an ocean of blood and hatred to find the person hiding underneath the monster. The conference began the next day. Silva stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. Humans and Vicorians sat together, separated by a narrow aisle that suddenly seemed less like a wall and more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. She spoke. She spoke about the war and its costs. She spoke about the guilt she carried and the things she could never undo. She spoke about the camps and the hatred and the invisible lines that people drew between themselves and others. And then she told them about a little girl who shared her bread with a dragon. Peace will not come from treaties alone, she said. It will not come from politicians or generals or any of the people in this room. It will come from ordinary acts of compassion that defy hatred. It will come from the simple choice to see a person instead of an enemy. A human child taught me this. She offered me food when I was starving, not for my body, but for my soul. And in doing so, she reminded me of something I had forgotten. She held up Lily's drawing for everyone to see. Enemies are only enemies until someone offers them bread. The hall was silent. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started small, uncertain, like rain on a tin roof. But it grew. It swelled. It became a wave that washed over the entire assembly. Human and Vicorian hands clapping together in a sound that had not been heard since before the war began. Later that evening, the camp held its first joint dinner. Humans and Vicorians sat at the same tables, sharing food that had been prepared together. It was awkward and uncomfortable and strange, but it was a beginning. Lily sat at a table near the center of the dining area. Her father was on one side, and Sylveth was on the other. The dragon lady looked different now. The weight had not left her shoulders, but it was easier to bear. The guilt had not disappeared, but it had been transformed into something useful. A reason to keep going. A purpose. Lily passed her a piece of bread and smiled. See? She said. Food tastes better when you share it. Sylveth took the bread and smiled back. It was not a perfect smile. It was too rusty, too uncertain, too new. But it was real. Across the galaxy, on dozens of worlds, humans and Vicorians were watching the footage from the conference. They were seeing the drawing that a little girl had made. They were hearing the words of a reformed war commander who credited a child with saving her soul. And they were starting to ask themselves uncomfortable questions about the enemies. They had been taught to hate, that it would take years for the wounds to heal. Perhaps some never would. But the process had begun. And it had started with the simplest thing in the universe. A little girl, a lonely dragon, and the bread that brought them together. This was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not their weapons or their technology or their stubborn will to survive, but their capacity for compassion. Their ability to look at an enemy and see a friend waiting to be found. Their children, who had not yet learned to hate. The Vicorians would study this for generations. They would write papers and theories and philosophical treatises trying to understand how humans could forgive the unforgivable. They would never fully grasp it, but they would never forget the lesson, taught by a 7-year-old girl named Lily Harper. Sometimes, the smallest hands can move the heaviest hearts. And sometimes, the best way to defeat an enemy is to offer them a seat at your table. The news came on a cold morning when the sky was gray and the wind carried the promise of rain. Earth's government had made a decision. The Vicorian refugees were to be relocated to a distant moon, away from human populations, where they could wait for transport back to their own territories. The announcement was made through speakers mounted on poles throughout the camp, and the words fell like stones into still water. Lily did not understand what relocation meant, but she understood the fear on Sylveth's face when she heard the news. She understood the anger in the voices of the human refugees who cheered and clapped when the announcement ended. She understood that something bad was about to happen. The tensions had been building for weeks. Small fights broke out between human and Vicorian refugees. Insults were shouted across the invisible line. Children were warned to stay inside after dark. The camp that had been merely unhappy was now becoming dangerous. Nathan tried to keep Lily close, but she slipped away whenever she could. She needed to see Sylveth. She needed to know that her friend was safe. Every evening, she climbed the outcrop and sat beside the Dragon Lady, and they did not talk about the relocation or the hatred spreading through the camp. They talked about stories and songs and the strange shapes that clouds made in the sky. But they both knew that the peace could not last. The riot started on a Tuesday night. Lily was walking toward the outcrop when she heard the shouting. A group of human refugees had crossed the invisible line, armed with tools and pipes and fury that had been building since the war began. They were yelling about justice and revenge, about families they had lost and homes that had been destroyed. The Vicorians tried to retreat, but there were too many humans and not enough space. The first punch was thrown, then the first weapon, and suddenly the camp was on fire with violence, and Lily was caught in the middle of it. She ran. She did not know where she was going, only that she needed to get away from the screaming and the blood. Bodies crashed into her, knocking her to the ground. She tasted dust and fear. She tried to get up, but someone stepped on her hand, and she cried out in pain. Then a shadow fell over her. The tall shape was scales that gleamed in the firelight. SYL single quotes VETH. The Vicorian moved faster than Lily had ever seen anyone move. She grabbed the child and pulled her close, wrapping her body around her like a shield. Something struck Sylveth's back and she made a sound of pain, but she did not let go. Another blow landed on her shoulder, another on her ribs. She absorbed them all, protecting the small human in her arms with everything she had. "Close your eyes," Sylveth said through gritted teeth. "Do not look. Just hold on to me." Lily buried her face in Sylveth's chest and squeezed her eyes shut. She could feel the impacts shaking the body that protected her. She could smell blood, and she did not know whose it was. But she did not let go. She held on as tightly as she could, and she prayed to whoever might be listening that they would survive. The peacekeepers arrived eventually. They used stun weapons and gas to break up the riot, and slowly the violence faded into groans and coughs and the distant wail of sirens. Lily opened her eyes and saw chaos, injured people everywhere, burning tents. And Sylveth, still holding her, covered in cuts and bruises and blood. Nathan found them like that. He pushed through the crowd of peacekeepers and medics, his face pale with terror. When he saw Lily in Sylveth's arms, unharmed except for a few scrapes, he made a sound that was half sob and half prayer. He dropped to his knees beside them. The Vicorian commander looked at him with golden eyes dimmed by pain and exhaustion. She tried to speak, but the words would not come. Instead, she simply held out the child, passing her carefully into her father's arms. "Thank you," Nathan whispered. His voice broke on the words. "Thank you." Sylveth nodded once. Then she collapsed. The peacekeepers took her away. They took all the Vicorians away, loading them into transport vehicles without separating the attackers from the victims. Lily screamed and fought against her father's grip, begging them to let her friend go. But nobody listened. The doors closed, the engines roared, and the vehicles disappeared into the night. Lily cried herself to sleep that night. Nathan sat beside her bed, stroking her hair and feeling utterly helpless. He had never hated anything as much as he hated the unfairness of this world. The next morning, he went to the camp administrator's office. The man in charge was named Cole Bradley, a tired bureaucrat with gray hair and permanent circles under his eyes. Nathan told him everything, about Lily and Sylveth, about the bread and the drawings and the stories, about how a Vicorian war commander had risked her life to protect a human child, when she could have simply run away. Cole listened without interrupting. When Nathan finished, He sighed and rubbed his temples. There were cameras, he said quietly. The whole thing was recorded. I have already seen the footage. Everyone has. It is all over the news networks now. Nathan blinked. What does that mean? It means, Cole said, that people are watching, humans and Vicorians alike. They saw what happened. They saw one of the most feared commanders in the Vicorian military take a beating to protect a human child. And they are asking questions that nobody wants to answer. He looked at Nathan with something that might have been hope, or might have been despair. Your daughter started something, he said. I do not know if it will help or hurt in the end, but it cannot be ignored anymore. None of us can pretend we did not see what we saw. Nathan left the office with a strange feeling in his chest. It was not quite hope. It was too early for hope, but it was something close. Something that felt like the first crack of light in a very long darkness. He went home and told Lily that her friend was safe. That people had seen what Sylveth did. That maybe, just maybe, things were going to change. Lily looked at him with red eyes and a face still puffy from crying. Then she asked the only question that mattered to her. Can I see her again? Nathan pulled her into a hug and promised he would do everything he could. It was not much of a promise, but it was all he had to give. Outside, the camp was quiet. The violence had passed, leaving wounds that would take a long time to heal. But somewhere in that wounded place, a seed was still growing. A seed planted by a little girl who shared her bread with a dragon. And nothing, not even hatred, could stop it now. The weeks that followed changed everything. What started as a few shared pieces of bread became something more, something neither Lily nor Sylveth had expected. The little girl visited the outcrop every day now, and every day the Vicorian commander found herself waiting for her. Lily brought more than food. She brought drawings of flowers and stars and strange animals from her imagination. She brought stories that her mother used to tell her about brave heroes and magical lands. She brought questions, endless questions about Vicorian culture and history, and what the stars looked like from the other side of the galaxy. Sylveth answered as best she could. She taught Lily simple words in the Vicorian language, watching with quiet amusement as the child struggled with the harsh sounds and clicking consonants. She described her homeworld, a place of tall mountains and deep oceans, where the sky turned pink at sunset and the trees grew so large that entire cities were built in their branches. In return, Lily taught her human things. She showed her how to play rock, paper, scissors, a game that confused Sylveth at first, but eventually made her laugh. She explained the rules of hopscotch, drawing the squares in the dust with a stick. She sang songs that her mother had sung to her, simple melodies about sunshine and rain and love that never ends. Something in Sylveth began to heal. It was slow and painful, like a frozen limb thawing after too long in the cold. But it was happening. The guilt she carried did not disappear, but it became easier to bear. The loneliness that had wrapped around her heart like chains began to loosen, one link at a time. The camp noticed. Of course they did. In a place where everyone lived so close together, secrets were impossible to keep. The humans whispered about Nathan Harper and his strange daughter who spent her evenings with the enemy. The Vicorians watched Sylveth with suspicious eyes, wondering why a disgraced commander was associating with the species they had fought and killed for so many years. One evening, a Vicorian elder named Virkith approached Sylveth as she walked toward the outcrop. He was old and bent, with faded scales and clouded eyes, but his voice still carried the weight of authority. You shame us all, he said in their native tongue, sitting with the humans like a pet, accepting their food like a beggar. Have you no pride left? Sylveth stopped walking. She turned to face the elder, and her golden eyes were cold. Pride? She replied, pride is what led us into this war. Pride is what killed millions on both sides. If I must abandon pride to find peace, "Then I will do so gladly." Verkith spat on the ground. "You are no longer Victorian," he said. "You are nothing." He walked away, and Sylveth stood alone in the fading light. A part of her wanted to scream. A part of her wanted to give up, to retreat into the darkness that had been her home for so long. But then she heard a small voice calling her name, and she turned to see Lily running toward her with a piece of paper flapping in her hand. The darkness retreated. The anger faded. And Sylveth walked toward the light, toward the child who saw something in her that she had forgotten was there. The humans were not much better. A group of refugees cornered Nathan one morning outside the supply depot. Their leader was a large man with burn scars on his arms and hatred in his eyes. He had lost his family in a Vicorian attack, and he did not understand how Nathan could let his daughter anywhere near those monsters. Nathan listened to their accusations. He kept his voice calm, even when they pushed him, even when they called him a traitor and a fool. When they finished, he said only one thing: "My daughter lost her mother to this war, just like you lost your families. She has more reason than most to hate the Vicorians. But instead of hate, she chose compassion. And I will not punish her for being a better person than the rest of us." The men did not know what to say to that. They walked away, muttering and unsatisfied. But they did not bother Nathan again. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Nathan climbed the outcrop to speak with Sylveth directly. Lily was busy drawing, humming to herself, paying no attention to the adults. Nathan sat down across from the Vicorian. They looked at each other for a long moment. Two people shaped by the same war, carrying different wounds. "I want to thank you," Nathan said quietly, "for being kind to my daughter. She has not smiled this much since we lost her mother." Sylveth shook her head. "You should not thank me. I do not deserve kindness from anyone, especially not from humans. I have done terrible things. Things that cannot be forgiven." Nathan was silent for a while. Then he said, "That is not for you to decide. Forgiveness is a gift. You cannot earn it or demand it. You can only accept it when it is offered." Sylveth looked at Lily, still drawing, still humming. The child had no idea what the adults were talking about. She was lost in her own world, a world where enemies could become friends and broken things could be mended with bread and songs. "She offered me food when I was starving," Sylveth said softly. "Not for my body, for my soul." I did not know humans were capable of such things. Nathan almost smiled. "Most of us are not. But she is special. She has her mother's heart." He stood up and brushed the dust from his clothes. He extended a hand toward Sylveth, a human gesture of peace and greeting. The Vicorian looked at it for a long moment. Then she reached out and clasped it, her clawed fingers wrapping carefully around his palm. It was not friendship. Not yet, but it was a start. Lily looked up from her drawing and saw them shaking hands. She grinned and went back to her work, adding more colors to the picture she was making. It showed two figures sitting together on a rocky outcrop, watching the sunset. One was small and human. The other was tall and covered in scales. And they were both smiling. The invisible line through the camp did not disappear that night. The prejudice and fear did not melt away. But something had shifted, something small and fragile and precious. A seed had been planted in the barren ground between two species, watered by the simple kindness of a little girl who refused to see enemies when she looked at the dragon. Lady on the Rocks. And seeds, as everyone knows, have a way of growing into things much larger than themselves. 3 days passed, and Lily's collection of bread grew. She saved a little from each meal, hiding the pieces in a small cloth bag under her bed. Her father noticed that she was eating less, but she told him she was not very hungry. Nathan frowned but did not push. Children went through phases, he told himself. She would eat more when she was ready. On the 4th day, Lily took her bag and walked to the outcrop just before sunset. Her heart was beating fast, and her hands felt sweaty against the rough fabric. She had never given a gift to someone who might not want it. She had never approached someone that everyone else was afraid of. Sylveth was in her usual spot. Her scales caught the orange light of the setting sun and turned them into something beautiful, like fire frozen in glass. She did not look down when Lily approached, but her body shifted slightly, acknowledging the small presence below. Lily climbed up the rocks. It was harder than she expected, and she scraped her knee once, but she did not stop. When she reached the flat surface where Sylva sat, she was breathing hard and her face was red. She stood a few feet away from the Vicorian, holding her bag in front of her like a shield. Sylveth finally turned to look at her. Up close, her eyes were a deep gold color, with vertical pupils like a cat. There were scars on her face that Lily had not noticed from below. Thin white lines that crossed her scales like old roads on a map. The Vicorian spoke. Her voice was deep and rough, with an accent that made the human words sound strange. "What do you want? Small one?" Lily swallowed. She opened her bag and pulled out the pieces of bread. They were a little stale now, but still good. She held them out with both hands, like an offering. "I notice you never eat with anyone," Lily said. "My mom always said that food tastes better when you share it. So I brought you some." Sylva stared at the bread. Then she stared at Lily. Her expression shifted through several emotions that Lily could not name, and her clawed hands tightened against her knees. "Is this a joke?" Sylva asked. "A trick? Did the others send you here to mock me?" Lily shook her head. "Nobody sent me. I just thought you looked hungry and sad." Nobody should feel that way. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind blew across the outcrop, carrying dust and the distant sounds of the camp. Lily's arms started to ache from holding the bread out, but she did not lower them. Then Sylveth reached out with one clawed hand and took a single piece. She held it carefully, as if it might break or disappear. She looked at it, then at Lily, then back at the bread. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was quieter now, almost a whisper. "Your people have every reason to hate mine. I have every reason to be hated. Why would you show me kindness?" Lily thought about this. She was not very good with big words or complicated explanations. She just knew what felt right and what felt wrong. "Because you looked like you needed it," she said simply. "And being mean to people who are already sad just makes more sadness." "My mom said that too." Sylveth was silent for a long time. Then she did something that Lily did not expect. She laughed. It was a strange sound, rough and unused, like a machine that had not been turned on in years. But it was a laugh. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Sylveth said. "She was," Lily replied. "She's not here anymore." Sylveth nodded slowly. She did not say she was sorry. Lily appreciated that. She had heard too many people say sorry when they did not really know what they were sorry for. The Vicorian took a small bite of the bread. She chewed slowly, and something in her face softened. It was not a smile, but it was close. Lily sat down on the rock next to her, keeping a comfortable distance between them. "Thank you," Sylveth said finally. "It has been a long time since anyone offered me anything without expecting something in return." Lily nodded. She pulled out another piece of bread and started eating it herself. They sat together in silence, watching the sun disappear below the horizon, sharing a simple meal on a rocky outcrop at the edge of a broken world. Below them, the camp continued its evening routine. People lined up for rations. Children played in the dusty streets. And some of them looked up at the outcrop and saw something they did not understand. A human child sitting beside a Vicorian war commander, eating bread together like old friends. The whispers started immediately. By the time Nathan came looking for Lily, Half the camp had heard that his daughter was spending time with the dragon lady. Some people were angry. Some were worried. A few, very few, were curious. Nathan found Lily climbing down from the rocks with an empty bag and a peaceful expression. He asked her what she had been doing, and she told him the truth. She had made a new friend. Nathan looked up at the outcrop. Sylveth was still there, watching them. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not friendship, not trust, but maybe the beginning of understanding. He took Lily's hand and walked her back to their shelter. He did not tell her to stop visiting the dragon lady. He did not lecture her about the dangers of talking to former enemies. He just held her hand and thought about what kind of world they were living in, where a 7-year-old girl was braver than most adults. That night, before Lily fell asleep, she asked her father if she had done the right thing. Nathan sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I think," he said slowly, "that your mother would have been very proud of you." Lily smiled and closed her eyes. She dreamed of dragons that were not scary and bread that tasted like hope. And somewhere on a rocky outcrop, a Victorian commander sat alone with a half-eaten piece of bread in her clawed hand, wondering how a small human child had managed to crack the armor she had spent years building around her heart. It was just bread. Just a few pieces of stale bread shared between strangers. But sometimes the smallest things carry the most weight. Sometimes a simple act of kindness can move mountains that armies could never touch. This was something the Victorians had never understood about humans. It was something many humans had forgotten about themselves. But a little girl named Lily still remembered, and that made all the difference. The refugee camp stretched across the dusty plains outside New Denver like a wounded animal trying to rest. Rows of gray tents and metal shelters stood in uneven lines, and the wind carried the smell of cooking fires and engine oil. The year was 2847, and the Great War between humanity and the Victorian Empire had finally ended. Not because anyone won, but because everyone was too tired to keep fighting. Lily Harper was 7 years old, and she did not understand most of what the adults talked about. She knew there had been a war. She knew her mother was gone. She knew her father, Nathan Harper, worked long hours fixing broken machines so they could earn enough credits for food. But mostly, she knew that the camp was boring and sad, and nobody ever smiled. The Victorians lived on the eastern side of the camp. Lily had seen them from a distance. They were tall, much taller than humans, with scales that shimmered like oil on water. Their faces were long and narrow, with ridges above their eyes and rows of small spines running down their necks. The other children called them dragons, and the adults called them worse things. Lily thought they looked like the pictures in her old storybook, the one her mother used to read to her before bed. Nobody talked to the Victorians. The humans stayed on one side, and the Victorians stayed on the other. There was an invisible line running through the middle of the camp, and everyone pretended it was a wall. Lily's father came home late, every evening with grease on his hands and exhaustion in his eyes. He would heat up their ration packets and sit with her at the small fold-out table in their shelter. He always asked about her day, and she always said it was fine, even when it was not. One evening, Lily wandered too close to the invisible line. She was chasing a piece of paper that the wind had stolen from her hands, a drawing she had made of a flower she remembered from their old home. The paper danced and tumbled across the ground, and she ran after it without thinking about where she was going. The paper finally stopped at the base of a rocky outcrop near the edge of the camp. Lily grabbed it and smiled, brushing off the dust. But when she looked up, she saw someone sitting on the rocks above her. It was a Victorian, a female, based on the softer ridges and the slightly smaller spines. She sat alone, her long legs pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her scales were a deep blue-green, and in the fading sunlight, They looked almost purple. She was staring out at the horizon, and there was something in her eyes that Lily recognized. It was the same look her father had when he thought she was not watching. The Vicorian noticed her. Those sharp eyes turned downward, and Lily felt her heart jump. But she did not run. She had never been very good at running away from things. The Vicorian said nothing. She just looked at Lily with an expression that was hard to read. Confusion, maybe? Or curiosity. After a long moment, Lily waved her hand in a small greeting. The Vicorian did not wave back. She turned her gaze away, back to the horizon, as if Lily was not worth her attention. Lily stood there for another few seconds, then walked back to her side of the camp with the crumpled drawing in her hand. That night, she asked her father about the dragon lady on the rocks. Nathan stopped chewing his food. He looked at Lily with that careful expression he always used when he was deciding how much truth to share with her. Then he swallowed and put down his fork. Her name was Commander Sylveth, he said. She had been an important leader in the Vicorian military. She had commanded warships, given orders that killed many people. But near the end of the war, she had started speaking out against the fighting. She had called for peace when her own government wanted more blood. Her people called her a traitor. The humans called her a monster. Now, she belonged to neither side. Lily thought about this for a while. Then she asked why the dragon lady always sat alone. Nathan did not have a good answer for that. He just said that some people carried so much weight on their shoulders that they forgot how to be around others. Lily nodded like she understood, but she was not sure she did. The next day, she went back to the outcrop. Sylveth was there again, in the same spot, with the same distant look in her eyes. Lily sat on a rock at the bottom of the outcrop, not too close, but not too far either. She pulled out her drawing and started working on it again, adding colors with the warm crayons she kept in her pocket. Sylveth glanced down at her once, then twice. But she said nothing. This became the routine. Every evening, Lily would wander to the edge of the camp and sit near the outcrop. Sometimes she drew. Sometimes she just watched the sky change colors. And Sylveth would sit above her, silent and still, like a statue carved from stone and scales. The other refugees noticed. The humans whispered and pointed. Some of them told Nathan that he should keep his daughter away from that creature. Nathan listened, but he did not stop Lily. He watched her come home each evening with dust on her clothes and a strange kind of peace in her eyes. And he could not bring himself to take that away from her. 1 week passed. Lily noticed that Sylveth never went to the food distribution area. She never stood in line with the other Vicorians. She never ate with anyone. Lily asked her father about this, and he said that maybe the dragon lady did not feel welcome anywhere. That did not seem right to Lily. Everyone needed to eat. Everyone needed to feel like they belonged somewhere. Her mother had taught her that before she went away. That night, Lily made a decision. She did not know if it was a good decision or a bad one, but it felt like the right thing to do. She saved half of her dinner roll, wrapping it carefully in a piece of cloth. She hid it under her pillow and went to sleep with a plan forming in her small, stubborn heart. She would find a way to make the dragon lady feel less alone. She did not know how yet, but she would figure it out. That was what her mother would have wanted. That was what a good person would do. Outside, the stars spread across the sky in patterns that humans and Vicorians had mapped from different worlds. Somewhere out there, both species had homes they might never see again. But here, in this dusty camp on Earth, a little girl was about to start something that neither side could have predicted. Something small and simple that would grow into something much bigger than anyone expected. All because a child looked at an enemy and saw a person who needed a friend.